And so, yes, we understand that something happened, there's an explosion, and now something is different as a result. But if you leave out the first part, we don't care.
Hello, everybody. This is Gino, host of the Wheelbarrow Profits podcast, and today I am excited to welcome a very special guest to the show. Today's guest is Kindra Hall. Kindra is President and Chief Storytelling Officer at Steller Collective, a consulting firm focused on the strategic application of storytelling to today's communication challenges. She was a national champion storyteller. Yes, they have those? And a former member of the board of directors of the National Storytelling Network. What began as a storytelling assignment in the 5th grade grew into a passion for not only telling stories, but a mastery for teaching others the methods and science of storytelling so they can better tell their own. So without further ado, Kindra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Gino.
So just tell the listeners, how did this book come out, and when did you fall in love with storytelling?
Yeah, well, it's, as you might imagine, it's a long story. But I feel like, anytime you're finding yourself on a path can be a variety of lengths. I told my first story when I was 11, as you heard in the intro. And for a long time, I just realized I was just seeing stories as method of entertainment, people telling stories at festivals or just among friends, or maybe even for performance, like open mic nights. But as I grew and went through college and then got my master's degree and then was in sales and marketing myself, I realized that this thing that I just knew how to do, this thing that I'd been playing with and a hobby of mine for my entire life, was A, extremely important in business, and B, that people would talk about how important it was, but nobody knew how to do it. And so it started as this desire just to help people do it. And I started speaking. So initially it was just at small, like marketing luncheons or small events where people were gathered, and then it just got bigger and bigger. And then, from stage to book, and here we are.
I'm going to tell a story real quick, everybody. The reason why I was excited to get Kindra on, I had just read Kindra's book. So picture this, back in December, I go to this live event. I just finished reading Kindra's book. I'm on stage. I'm doing a fireside chat. It's about an hour long. And I thought I did pretty well. I'm weaving in stories. I'm keeping people engaged. I got off stage and people started coming up to me, and you have in your book, they said that was a captivating hour. And I'm sitting there scratching my head. I said, what did I do differently? And a couple of things I did differently was my wife actually comes up to me and says, you told some really amazing stories there. And I didn't know what else I did. I'm always providing value. We're in the multifamily space, so we teach students how to, get educated in buying apartments. But if you don't get stories locked in and you don't understand, you don't try to chunk it down and make it digestible, consumable, entertaining, and all that, that's what your book does. And that to me was like, I need to get her on. I need to have people understand raising capital, getting in front of people. It's all about sales. But if you can't connect with the story, you can't tell. We're going to go through the 4 stories, the founder story, the value stories, all those. It's amazing. So I'm excited. I want everyone to take out pen and paper because there's a lot of notes here. So let's jump into it. Give me the 3 elements to building a strong bridge, because I must have built a really strong bridge into that audience. So
yeah,
let's go into the 3 elements first.
Well, you mentioned one of them, which is captivation, and that's ultimately, I mean, the 3 elements kind of are circular, right? They keep coming back. But if I were to say there was a starting point, it would be captivating. Trying to captivate your audience. How do you there's a lot of research and talk about how much noise there is and how much distraction we have now, and that at any given moment, we can just take out our phone and start scrolling. So how do you, and I'm sure that's an option they have when they're at the event and you're on stage. So how do you, whether you're giving a pitch, no matter, captivation is key. How, if you're saying something or delivering some kind of message, how do you make sure that people are paying attention? And there are a lot of tricks and, things that people try to do that really don't that really don't work. And telling a story is this natural way to keep, even if they do stray at some point during the pitch or the conversation, to keep drawing them back in. So the first element is captivation. And then the second one is influence. How do you, once you have their attention, how do you influence them to believe something, or to see something the way that you see it, or to take action? And you can come right at it and you can say these are the reasons, but it's a lot easier if, here's what I believe that stories do, is as we're listening to the story, we start convincing ourselves. And so then you suddenly have two forces working in your favor, not only the message that you're delivering, but the message they're delivering to themselves, which then leads to influence. And then the last one is transformation, where it goes beyond, it has a lasting impact, the message that you're delivering. Now they're not just a one-time believer where you have to keep convincing them. They're with you. They're on your team. They come to you first. They believe in what you're doing.
So I love that. Everybody, the first one is attention. Write that down. The second one is influence. And the third one is to transform the audience. It's all in her book. I'm going to show you the book. You need to pick the book up. But I mean, those three to start building that strong bridge. The next thing is, let's get into the 4 components of a story, because that'll actually help people to start build their own stories and see what elements they need in their storytelling.
Well, and this for me was the most important part of the book. This was the part that I wanted to make sure got out there. Because as I mentioned, storytelling isn't new. Storytelling is something we've been doing since the beginning of mankind. But then especially in business, it's not even a new concept in business. However, even with all the talk about how important it is to be telling stories and using stories, it's still really unclear for people what a story needs in order to be entertaining, in order to be persuasive, in order to be attention grabbing and memorable. I mean, I'm thinking, like, to have that lasting effect. So we did the research, and this is based on, years of my storytelling experience, and then really putting it to the test to see what makes a great story. And there are 4 key components, and I see these as a checklist where you can take a look at the pitch you're putting together and look at what you think is quote unquote a story, and then ask yourself, does it have these 4 things? And if it does, you're on the right track. If it doesn't, go back, you need to do some work. So the 4 key components are, first, identifiable characters. Your story needs to have a character in it, a person, a human, someone your audience can relate to. Now that person can be you. You can be the identifiable character in the story. It could be a different investor of yours. It could be a different client of yours. It could be, there's a whole variety of options, but there needs to be a person in that story. Someone we can identify, clearly see them, almost know what they look like, know what they act like really visualize who this person is. And then secondly, we can identify with that person, where they look familiar to us. We're like, oh yeah, I get that person. Yeah, I've seen that. I know that person. So that's the first component, is to have a person in your story. You're never doing business with a business or a company name. You're doing business with people, and that's what makes you good. So include those people in the story. The second component is authentic emotion. And this is important, because without authentic emotion, what can happen is you just give a recount of a series of events. First this happened, and then this happened, and then my daughter was telling me a story the other day, and it just kept going, and it was and then, and it was really just a review of what had happened during her day. And we do this. We say, well, first we did this with this person, and then we did this, and then we solved their problem, and now they are, have this XYZ success. But in any story, there's always something at stake. there's always hope or nervousness or a moment of tension or maybe some great stories are stories where the emotion is regret, where maybe the person didn't invest with you and they should have. Like, that is a powerful emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So to have the emotions, and then the other side of authentic emotion is, there's a misconception, I believe, that in order for a story to be worth telling, if you will, that it has to be really dramatic. Like, it has to be this huge obstacle or overcoming a really big challenge or something really tragic or a huge success. But really, we feel as people authentic small emotions all the time, those
Mm-hmm.
flashes of stress or the flashes of excitement, and that is more important than something really big. So those authentic emotions that people feel on a daily basis will make your stories stick and stand out. So there's two of them.
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep going. The third one is, number 3, is to have a moment in your story, and this is the hardest one to explain. I think you get a good sense for it as you go throughout the course of the book, right? And as I'm
Yeah.
showing examples and saying, oh, here's what the moment was, here's what the moment was. But ultimately, what we're trying to do with all of these components is drive what I call the co-creative process, which is a huge leveraging point for storytelling. Whereas I am telling my story or you are telling your story on stage, the audience is listening, yes, but the other thing that they're doing is taking the details from your story and adding their own images to it, images that matter from their lives. If you're talking about your first apartment or apartment unit, they're picturing the apartments they first bought or
Mm-hmm.
the apartment they first invested in. So in that way, we're blending the two versions of the story together. And because they participate, the story will stick with them longer. So what a moment does, and this is what the third component is it's really an opportunity to zoom all the way in, slow it all down, and put it at a very specific place and time.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways you can do that is, I'll never forget putting the sold sign on that very first,
Mm-hmm.
pulling out the sold sign and putting it on there and taking a step back and thinking to myself, we did it. We really did it. Or opening a door for the very first time, or the first time a client came in and thanked you for, but to slow it all the way down to have a specific place and time is what the moment is,
I like
so that
that.
everyone can visualize that.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
then
the
the
fourth
last
one?
one is specific details, uh, which should be present throughout, but just including those specific details, again, to drive that co-creative process. So what did the office look like? What did the carpet look like? What did, those small things that can give a
Mm-hmm.
nod that also show that you understand where the audience is coming from as well.
So I want everyone to hear this real quick. Our founder story that I've been working on, I used Kindra's components there. So what I did was, it's a pizza guy and a drug rep. Those are the identifiable characters. I'm the pizza guy. Jake is the drug rep. I'm a struggling small business owner. Jake is a W-2 employee who's caught in the rat race, right? Authentic emotion, I'm moving away from pain. Jake is moving away from getting the layoff slip every year. Those are authentic emotions. That's what people can really relate to. Significant moments. Back in 2009, I meet Jake. He comes into my kitchen. He's my brother's friend. I'm cooking Jake's chicken. He's got a
Yeah.
dish named after him, and I don't. Who is this jerk, right? In the beginning, that's my emotion. 2 years later, we create a good relationship, and I sit down with him in my restaurant. One day, he's leaving to go to Tennessee. He leaves, and we stay in touch. We pull out the laptop. We start looking at deals. Other significant moments are our first deal that we closed, our 25-unit deal, which was really great. I go into that. And then talking to the listeners about that moment in time when you know it's time to cut the cord and take the leap. I'm in my shed doing $10 an hour work on my cell phone trying to negotiate an $11 million deal, and that is really a significant moment. It has specific details, and people can relate to that. So I want everybody out there just to stop and really think about what their story is, because I think Kindra also should say to everybody, everyone thinks they don't have a story. And I want Kindra to talk about that, because we all have amazing stories. And like she said, they don't have to be these amazing, huge things. But what I talked about, I didn't think I had a story either, but everyone's out there. A lot of people are struggling with the W-2, or they're struggling with the small business. So Kindra, can you speak to that a little bit and just tell everybody that we all have that story?
Well, I think that is one of the other big barrier to people using their stories and really tapping into the power that a story has, is that A, we don't know how to do it, but even before that, B, so maybe it's like A and then B, but that we think we don't have stories to tell. Because the truth is, our stories don't sound like stories to us. They just sound like life. Like, this is just how my life was. And we don't realize that there are those moments where you're cooking Jake's chicken or you're standing out in your shed. Like, those moments are moments that stories can be built around. I was at an event just last week, and a woman was there who had read the book, which I have to say is now a new thing for me, because the book is relatively new. And it used to be that I would go speak at an event and nobody had ever heard of this before. Now people are coming up to me and telling me how they've used the book. They've already read the book before I speak, which is different and very exciting. But this woman came up to me, and we'll take it. This is different than what we're talking about here, but at the same time, it's the same. Her daughter was working on her college essays, and she'd been struggling with it for weeks and didn't know what to write for the essay. And there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stress to put these essays together. And the mother read the book and said, well, you need to start with a story. Just start your essay with a story. And the girl said, what? I don't have any. I'm 18. Like, I don't have any stories. Nothing is different about me. All the same thoughts that anyone, no matter what story you're trying to create, no matter how old you are, no matter what the circumstances are, you're thinking you don't have a story. And so then the mother said, well, we grew up your entire life hosting foreign exchange students every summer. Who else in your life did that? Like, that is not a normal experience. And the mother said all of a sudden a light bulb went off in her daughter's head. Like, I never really thought of that. And she sat down and in 20 minutes wrote her essay. And it started with, I never really thought it was strange that every morning I woke up in the summer with a stranger in my house. And there it was. The story was right there. So something to remember, and this was another one of my hopes for the book, was this is a universal problem, thinking that we don't have stories to tell, or thinking that our stories aren't big enough, or thinking that, well, why would anybody be interested in my story versus someone else's story their story seems so much more exciting. And really what we need is someone to say to us, hey, there might be a story there. So this young woman who was trying to write her college essays, her mother said that to her. Now I'm hoping that the book can be that voice for other people to say, no, there's a story. There's a story there.
I have to thank Kindra, because my son is 17. He's writing a college essay to go to Flagler College, and same thing. He sits there. I just right before I got on this call, I went over the essay again with him again, and his essay was about becoming part of the Jake and Gino community, coming to our event, getting on stage in front of 500 people, speaking, interning with us. That whole thing was just amazing, because I'm sure that and his goal, what he said, once he got off the stage, his first thought was, I want to become an entrepreneur. So, I mean, that's a great story in and of itself. And it had all those elements. It had the identifiable character. His emotion was really high. He got off. He had a significant moment. He went on stage, and he had specific details. He's a musician too. So he likes to play piano and guitar. So he was at the event playing the piano in this grand ballroom with other attendees there. So to me, it was amazing. So this book has really affected my life a lot. I mean, really, it's been awesome. What I want to go jump into now is the framework, the normal, the explosion, and the new normal. So people can get an idea of the framework, how it works, and how they can start implementing. Do you mind jumping into that?
Yeah, of course. So we have the 4 key components, which really serve as a checklist. Like, do I have these 4 things that are going to make my story memorable, compelling, influential, all of the things we discussed earlier? But now, of course, the question is, all right, so how do I put these things together? And there's a lot of discussion about different frameworks that you can use for storytelling. There's, all the way from 9 steps to 5 steps but for me, I'm thinking, if one of the barriers is we think that our stories aren't good enough, putting a pressure of a 9-step system on it isn't going to help that problem. And then number 2, I'm talking about stories in business. Like unless you're a playwright, you can't be thinking about all of the steps along the hero's journey. So I break it down into 3 steps. And where I first heard this simplified format was actually from my storytelling mentor. His name is Donald Davis. And this is my version of it, which, as you said, is normal, explosion, new normal. And that those are the 3 parts of the story. Now, the explosion is the thing. It sounds very dramatic. And again, it isn't. Nothing has to be dramatic about these stories. But the explosion really is the moment that things happen. A decision was made, action was taken, realization was had. Like, this is kind of and oftentimes the explosion lines up with the moment component, right? Where everything slows down and you're like, oh, wait, this. And then the 3rd part moves on to the new normal, which is what is possible now, what you learned as a result, what your life is like after this change, this shift. So for your son, for example, he walked off stage to uproarious applause and went down backstage or into the audience and thought to himself, this is what I'm going to do. And now this is what I want my education to lead to now, after experiencing this explosion. Now you're going to notice that even in my description right here, that I started in the middle and then went to part 3 and haven't yet mentioned part 1, which is the normal. And the reason I did that is because that's what most people do. They start in the middle of the story. They would start the story with, I'll never forget the day I walked out on stage and I gave my first speech to 500 people. And I knew in that moment that I was going to be an entrepreneur. Okay, well, that's fine. But we're missing all of those components, which is what were you feeling? What were you, like, what's the tension? What are the details? Tell me more about that moment. And all of those components really belong right there in the normal. That's where you set the scene. That's where you tell them what you were thinking about. That's where you include the details, the nuances of who you are, if you're the main character, or if you're the identifiable character of who your client is, if they were the identifiable character. That's where you build that co-creative process. You draw them in to the story. And so the biggest mistake that I see people making is they leave that first part out. And so, yes, we understand that something happened, there's an explosion, and now something is different as a result. But if you leave out the first part, we don't care. We don't care that much. It just sounds like any other quote unquote story we've ever heard. So this is where the difference really can be made, is spending a little bit of time on that normal. And here's the advantage is now with all this talk about, oh, you've got to do it quick and we don't have that much time and you only have blah, 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 blah. The truth is, if you're building a normal, if you're using those components, you buy yourself a whole lot of time, because people are picking up on that. They're engaging in it. They're picturing it. They're wondering what's going to happen. Where is this going to take me? They are willing participants in your story because you're building out that.
So that's what happened. So when I talk about 2009 and 2011, I'm sharing my pain. I'm sharing that Jake and I are regular people. We haven't done real estate yet. So people can actually connect with us, and then they can go on the journey with us before we get that first deal, because now they're looking at us. We have over 1,500 units. They're like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But if I go to the explosion and say, hey, I'm done and I'm doing this, they can't connect. So that's really important. Would you say that's?
I think that's really the key, because yes, if you were to start the story with, we have 50, how many? That's a lot of units.
It's a lot. It is.
But if you were to start there, exactly what you said, people would say, that's not what? Like, that isn't me. But if you start in the normal, and this is why the normal is so important, because it gives your audience an opportunity to say, oh, that sounds like me. Oh, I felt that way. I totally relate to that. Oh my gosh, I've been there.
Yes.
And we enjoy the normal, because depending on the type of story and what your objective is for the story, you're talking about us, and we all love hearing about ourselves. And so, yes, it might be a story about you, but if you're doing it right, it's also a story about them. And we like that.
I love that. So let's jump into how you find your story. I mean, in the book, you go talk about focusing on nouns, thinking about first. Can you jump into that a little bit with us?
Yeah, I think that the finding stories is another stopping point, right? We've already
Mm-hmm.
talked about how we think we don't have a story to tell. And that's not true. All it is finding stories. So in the book, I give some strategies. You can think about firsts, like the first deal you did or the first apartment, like think about firsts in your life. You can think about people or places. And as you think about the
Mm-hmm.
nouns in your life, stories will start coming back to you of things that happened with that person, or event stories that occurred within the walls of that particular place.
Mm-hmm.
A really important part of finding stories, especially if you're using stories strategically, in that, like, you want your story to, after they hear it, they want to do something, or they want to say yes to you, or they want, whatever it is. It's really important as you're choosing your story then to be thinking about your audience. Who are they? What do they care about? What are they nervous about? What might their objections be? What might their questions be? What might be those moments where they're like, no, that's too much for me. That doesn't sound real. That doesn't sound right. And then you want to choose your stories that most closely reflect your audience.
Yep.
Do you hear the sirens?
I do. There's a story behind that one too, right?
Welcome to New York City. Well, here, I'll tell you the short story while we wait for the ambulance to pass. And typically I record, when it's a non-video podcast, I record it in my son's bedroom under his bunk bed amidst all of his toys. But under a bunk bed is not the best of video. So, you get a little trade-off here. You
That's
get a
right.
little trade-off. Real life. It's okay.
That's right. Before we jump into the four, I think this is really important, because I think you've broken it down into the four different types of stories: the value, founder, purpose, and customer. Can we go into those different four? And I like that you say, don't just tell a story to tell a story. I mean, that's really important. A lot of us do that. So really get crystal clear. So can we go through those four types of stories that you have in the book?
Of course. And I think to that end, the don't tell a story just for a story. I mean, there's a time and place for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're hanging out with friends, or when you're getting together with family, and there's a whole different book that we could write about that. And I do believe that the more stories we share in life,
Mm-hmm.
the better humanity would be. Stories lead to empathy and understanding. They build bridges between people that show that, hey, we're not so different after all, or maybe illuminate what our differences are, but in an enlightening
Mm-hmm.
way. So that being said, though, yes, if you're telling stories, it should not just be for story's sake. In business,
Mm-hmm.
that's a very selfish approach, and you're going to get dinged for it, because you'll then be the person that's always talking about yourself. So
Yes.
when you're thinking about using your stories, make sure you're not telling your stories just to hear yourself talk. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure you're telling the stories because it's the story that they're going to want to hear. It's a story that will serve them.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, we kind of laid out four different types of stories. And the reason for doing this is, again, to give people a baseline for getting started. Like, okay, I need a story. What story should I tell, or what kind of story should
Mm-hmm.
I tell? So the four kinds are value stories, the founder story, purpose stories, and customer stories. So the value story, really, those are the stories that illustrate the value of what you bring, the true value, what this, of your service, of your product, of your initiative. Value stories are really your sales and marketing stories. They answer those questions of why this product, or why this service, or why should I open my wallet,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately is what it is. Then there's the founder's story, and the founder's story is, and you mentioned your founder's story earlier, and it's particularly important for entrepreneurs, is who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you doing this thing? And as you are pitching, remember that people are buying you as much or more than they're buying what it is that you say you offer. I had a friend who was in real estate and was, you know, part of a big team, and they were in on a pitch. There was land, a big piece of land, and everybody was coming in to pitch why they should be the one to get the land. And she said it was fascinating how if all the pitches were considered equal, which many of them, I mean, the prices were the same, the things that they offer were the same, it really came down to the stories that they did or didn't tell. Like as the panel's sitting there listening to each one of these pitches, which person do they like more? Which person do they feel like they know better? Which person do they feel like they trust more? And let me tell you, if you're the one telling a story and everybody else is just talking about their experience, they're going to like and trust and feel like they know you more than anyone else in the room. So yeah, maybe you don't have the most experience. Maybe you don't have the exact best deal, but if they like you the best, you win. Telling your founder's story, where did you get started? Why are you doing this? Why do you care? Implicitly, you're saying, this is who I am. This is why you should trust me. This is why I'm more than just the name that you see on the business card or my logo.
Excellent.
That's the founder story. The third story is a purpose story. And purpose stories are really more about for leadership opportunities. So these are the stories that maybe you would share internally. These are your personal stories where, and I feel like I should say this, they aren't mutually exclusive, these 4 types of stories. Like there's a lot of crossover. Yep. And you might be telling your founder story to show the value of what you bring, and you might tell a purpose story in a sales pitch because maybe, you know, there's a tumultuous situation and they need to really see the essence of your character and the principles upon which you do business, in which case you might tell a purpose story. And then lastly are customer stories. And customer stories are a form of value stories. They really come from the customers themselves, and it's the customer's normal explosion, new normal. What was the customer hopeful for? What were they struggling with? Or what lesson had they learned the hard way? Then they found you, and now this is the result.
That was native. You had the deodorant.
Yeah.
I actually, it's so ironic. I opened up my drawer last month. I see it there. I'm like, she must have gotten the story. It was the weirdest thing in the world.
Isn't that crazy?
I'm looking at it. I'm like, I've seen that before. Where have I seen it?
Yes. And their whole thing exploded. Native deodorant, which is one of the case studies that I shared in the book, exploded because they were relentless in seeking out customer stories. And they're more than just reviews on Yelp. They're more than just, we would trust to so-and-so with our lives. They're the whole story. I was struggling with this, or I was looking for that. I found this guy, I found this person, found this woman, and now this is possible.
Now, what I want to do for all the listeners, I want everyone to think creatively. If you have a value story and you're out there and you're trying to pitch multifamily, don't start talking about rates of return. Tell them why multifamily is powerful. Tell them that you are actually providing housing for people. They aren't tenants, they're residents. That's the first thing. The second thing, lock it in. The second thing is also the investor itself. See what the investor's goals are. Try to add value on their side. The third thing is, on our first property, we created a community. We took a community that was really run down, had drug problems. We actually renovated it. We brought tremendous amount of value to that community. So if you can paint the picture to the investor, you're doing a really common good, and you're also providing a rate of return for that. I think if you can put that story together, the value story, I think that's amazing. And the founder story, tell people why you're investing in multifamily real estate or any kind of real estate. What's that vehicle for? It's just a vehicle to get you from point A to point B. But if you can tell people like Jake and I, we got into multifamily because we wanted to get out of the rat race. But then eventually we saw the opportunity that we were able to provide value and money for our family, that we wanted to start giving it to other people. I'm not talking about the rate of return. I'm not talking about the 5-year horizon. I'm just talking about what the vehicle is able to do. And then they'll want to hear more. And then maybe that's when they're open to it. I mean, we can talk about the neocortex and the croc brain of how to pitch it, but the story really goes from my neocortex to your croc brain, to your primitive brain. And you're actually, that story will allow you to open up and say, wow, I never thought of multifamily in that light. I only thought of it as something where people pay rent. But if you can say that's where a resident has their home, and our property management company, our core values are people first and growth mindset. We have so many different, but the people first aspect is important, and we want to provide that value. And our communities are our education students. We have residents. We have property managers, we have investors. That's our entire community, and they're all intermingled. And if you can start with that, people can get an understanding of it, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, that makes sense to me. I can make money doing this. I think that does well. Does that make sense to you, Kindra, how I've broken it down?
Yeah, no, and I think that's something you said in there was a really interesting, as you're talking about rates and returns, and I would imagine that part of your job is to get them really excited about something that, I mean, maybe they understand it, maybe they don't. I mean, I would imagine there's a lot of different things that investors can do with their money. So even to tell, like, there's so many different angles that you can take. You can tell that you're creating a home, but also, like, these are people who want to make money, right? Like, it's okay. Like, they want to make money. So how do you say that beyond, well, you can make a lot of money? Tell the stories of people who have invested in this way, and what they've provided for their family, or what they've allowed their family to do. And in order to tell those stories, you have to go back and ask, but, like, yeah, what are some of other previous investors? What were some of the things that they dreamed of doing, and now they're able to do it because this is what they decided to invest in.
I love that. So talk about retirement money, talk about able to be going on vacation.
Exactly. Take your whole family. Yeah. Yes. Like, one of the things I want to do, I have this dream of taking, like, my whole family on a trip, like my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister and my husband and my kids and everybody. Like, I just want to go on a trip, and I want to do that and provide that for them. And, like, imagine if I was able to do that because of my investment here. We all have those different dreams when we're investing and really wanting to get that good rate of return. But you're making it matter so much more when you're sharing those stories.
I love that. Let's take a quick time out to hear from our sponsors.
Hey, Gino, the two most common questions I've been asked have been, how do I get into real estate and do my first deal? The other question has been, how do I scale my real estate portfolio? Get those all the time. We have great news for you. Gino, tell them about it.
We can help you answer both of those questions. We have a 2-day investor training coming up in Pittsburgh on March 28th and the 29th, where attendees can learn our 3-step proprietary framework: buy right, manage right, and finance right. Our 3-step framework has helped hundreds of real estate entrepreneurs successfully get started in real estate with no experience, and it has also helped experienced real estate entrepreneurs take it to the next level.
If you want more information on this event or to sign up, visit www.jakeandgino.com/WBPL.
Well, we've been talking about stories, creating stories, and just putting everything together. And I think everyone sees the relevance. Whatever space you're in, you have to start creating stories, whether you want to be a speaker, whether you want to sell. I think that's really important. One thing I wanted to ask is, how do you avoid common crafting pitfalls? Any pitfalls when you're creating a story?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, we touched on it earlier, and of course I list a few more in the book, but one of the biggest ones is forgetting really who the story is for. And your story is going to hit hardest and be the most effective if you're crafting that story, again, with the audience in mind. So to know them, to know what they're hopeful for, to know what maybe have they had a bad experience in the past. The more you know about them, the better able you will be to craft a story that, while it might be about you, it actually is about them.
I like that. So it looks like one of the biggest storytelling mistakes. Quick, short answers. What's your best habit for success? And not going underneath the bed, trying to record videos on podcasts.
Oh gosh, a best habit for success. I would say to be really conscientious of your time. I went through this exercise. I just did it for myself the other day because I felt like I was running around and, like, I don't have enough time. I have all these dreams. I have all these things I want to do. I have all these things that I know I can do, but I don't have enough time. So I was like, you know what I need to do? I need to really actually sit down and figure out how much time I have. And I do best if I get 8 hours of sleep. It used to be 7. I guess I'm getting older. And then, there's a certain amount of time each day that you need to manage your family or whatever. And then there's the certain hours that it's like those tasks in business. And then you have those blocks of hours that are really should be dedicated to the things that only you can do, whether that's cold calls or making pitches or prepping pitches. For me, it's writing the book, preparing for the next keynote. Like no one on my team can do. I have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so setting out those blocks of time, and then at the end of it, so like when I really thought about it, it's like, you know what? There was still like hours left over. I was like, okay, so where did these hours go? What am I doing? So then I was like, oh, they must be going to social media. They must be going to, I don't know. So just being very, now again, I think there should always be time for time flexibility, and downtime, but just the awareness of the time, I feel like has been a really important key to success for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Do you have any book recommendations? I mean, are there any other books on storytelling out there? I've only read yours. I think yours is fabulous. I don't think I need to read any other storytelling books, but what other books can you recommend to listeners?
Yeah. So I think as far as, and so forgive me for this, but I've read a lot of the other storytelling books, and that was another reason that I wrote this one, is I just didn't, there was just,
well, there's no framework.
Yeah.
Well, it's more fluff. Like this is actual content. You're actually giving threes, you're giving frameworks, you're giving next action steps. That's why it's awesome. I mean, that's why I love it. And it's the only book you need to read, because once you figure out what your founder story, what your value story is, and all the characters you need in it, that's all you need. And then you just you start creating your own.
That was really so to that. But I am reading, my favorite book of all times is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, of course, as I'm just talking about my time. And then I just finished Atomic Habits by James Clear, which was interesting. It was interesting with those two together. Another book that I love is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. It's a little bit more on the it's called Big Magic, but just the way that things happen when we're open to how they happen. So I love that book. I'm trying to think of some others, but yeah, those 3 for now.
I love that. What project are you excited about right now?
Ooh, very excited, and also extremely tormented by book number 2. So I'm in the beginning phases of that, which of course, I mean, not to equate myself to some is very successful artist, but I understand now the sophomore, the fear of the sophomore album. I'm very proud of stories that stick. I definitely feel like I came in to do something and I did it. And so now every time I sit down to I'm in the proposal phase of book 2, and I'm like, it's not going to be as good as the first one. But at the same time, I'm just really excited about what could be possible for that one.
It's amazing. Tony Robbins says that on the first one, you have nothing to lose because you've never written one. Now you've been massively successful. On the second one, you're a little bit afraid of failing, but there's no such thing as failure, because putting out another book, how much work is involved in that, everybody? There's a lot of work. There's a lot of time that you're sacrificing. There's ideas, there's thoughts. And once you put it out there, it's okay. I mean, you've done all that work. So that's awesome. Do you have an event coming up soon?
We actually, one of the other aspects of what we're doing is now hosting storytelling workshops. We sensed the demand when Stories That Stick came out, which of course I really feel like you could read the book and make a whole lot of progress on your stories. But we heard the cry, people wanting me to either write their stories, which I can't do. It's just too much time. So we're hosting storytelling workshops, and we do a couple a year. We have one coming up. I'm not sure when this will air, but we do have one coming up in Nashville on February 8th, which is a Saturday. And then another one coming up in May 2nd in New York City. So they're just one day. It goes from 8:30 to 5. You get a break or 2. We'll feed you lunch, and that's about it because we got a lot of work to do. We keep them small and intimate, so there is an opportunity for you to ask your questions about your stories. I teach the whole thing. We've done 2 already. The reviews have been great. So we have that coming up. I think more info, you can go to kindrahall.com, which is KINDRA HALL.com for more info. And I think we still have early bird pricing because we're not very good at taking early bird pricing down, if I'm totally honest. So.
That's another thing. It's another thing you're going to figure out, right? You just got to commit and figure it out.
Yep.
I mean, this to me has been, a lot of fun. Like I said, it's transformed my ability to speak. Now you can go up there and be a polished speaker and all, but if you're authentic and you have all these frameworks and you're able to build a few stories for yourself and go back to them, and you're going to continue to have stories. So you're going to be continuing to revolutionize your stories. The book is Stories That Stick. I just want to thank Kindra for being on today, for sharing her story. And I want you all to check her out. If you want to take your storytelling and you want to take your speaking to the next level, please check her out. I want to thank for being on.
Oh,
Thanks, Kindra.
thank you. It's such a pleasure. And I need to get more information about your stories. Maybe you can be in the next book.
Take care. Take care, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.